Alrighty then. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 146. I am your host, Panyobasa. This is my beverage. And 146 clearly is not a prime number because it is even, and the only even number that is prime is 2. So 146 is actually 2 times 73. And some of you may notice that I've got somewhat of a black eye and also somewhat of a gash on the side of my head. And you don't need to point it out to me in the comments because I've already noticed it. And I just want to point out right here and now that it is not due to domestic violence, that it was not caused by my beautiful woman hitting me with a frying pan because I forgot our anniversary. No, it wasn't like that. Regardless of any evidence to the contrary, it didn't happen that way. What actually happened was, it happened at work. And I was pulling this. I mean, it was just minutes before I left for work last night that just one last thing to do. I was going to pull a table down. And I just pulled it. It's like I had to use my foot to kind of wedge for leverage, and then my foot got caught under the table as I was pulling it over, and it just fell on me and hit me in the face, just knocked me flat on my back. That is the official story. And I suppose I should just start answering questions. I didn't bother to count all the questions here. Maybe I should. Maybe I should just demonstrate my counting skills, because I can count way up high. Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38 questions, which is getting up there. So I guess I should just wade into this. And the first question is from Rui. And Rui says, do you really think Gautama was trying to convert people? And I assume what he means here is like converting them to Buddhism, because I don't know what else he'd convert them to, unless he's just converting them from unenlightened to enlightened. And I think that would be the only kind of conversion he'd really be trying to do. I mean, he wasn't trying to convert anyone to a new religion. I mean, if you read the Atthakavagga, which is probably the largest fragment of archaic Buddhism still in existence, like pre-Theravada, pre-schism, just very early teachings before the teachings began. I mean, they became popularized and just started like mutating like a virus. And you read the Atthakavagga and it's saying, do not follow philosophies. Do not believe anything. So the Buddha wasn't trying to convert people to some new religion. He wasn't trying to convert them to Dhamma or Dharma. He was just trying to help them wake up. So if you want to call that a kind of conversion, you're undergoing the conversion from like sleepwalking to fully awake, then sure. But I do not think he was trying to convert anyone to Buddhism. Even though, if you read some of the suttas, it does kind of appear that way. And so I'm just going to move on to Rui's second question, which is, did you ever, during your cave-dwelling Burma days, have to resort to protection chanting? And when I was living in caves, I really didn't have to do any protection chanting, including when I was living in the big cave on the northern boundary of Alando Kathapa National Park in Sagaing Division in Burma. That cave, a lot of people were afraid to go near that cave because it was supposedly haunted by an asant, which is a kind of guardian spirit, sort of a terrestrial deva. And I never had any problems with any kind of supernatural beings while living in caves. There was the famous time when I allegedly was attacked by ogres when I was living under a tree in southern Burma, living on top of a big flat boulder under some kind of tropical chestnut tree on the outskirts of ThiBet Ain Doya monastery in Mon State in southern Burma, where one morning I woke up and I'm trying to see if it's dawn yet because I didn't have a watch or a clock or anything. I just went for alms round at dawn. So I was propped up like this, looking to see if it was dawn, kind of looking towards the horizon. And I started hearing like loud noises and then realized that I could not move. I was paralyzed, like kind of like this, lying on my side. And at that time, just in case whatever happened, I mean, just in case it was some kind of beings that were messing with me, because I was warned repeatedly that there are like ogres and so forth in this forest that may mess with you. I just sort of internally, I couldn't move my lips. I was like frozen, but internally I just started Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhasa, and it just evaporated. So, I mean, that's kind of protection chanting, I guess. Also, when I was like 20 years old, I moved into this crummy little studio apartment for the summer. And it just had a really heavy vibe. It was an old building. And you'll have to forgive me because my glasses are now kind of crooked, because when I got hit in the side of the head, it was like it messed my glasses all up. And I'm afraid to bend it too much because I don't want to just snap them in half, trying to get them back into shape again. But anyways, when I was about 20 years old, I moved into this crummy little studio apartment, and it was an old building. Probably a lot of people had been there. A lot of unwholesome actions had been perpetrated in that apartment, probably. And it just had like this dark vibe to it. So I just did this little ceremony. I wasn't fully converted to Theravada yet. I was like reciting verses from the Diamond Cutter Sutra, burning incense in front of a little Buddha statue and just kind of doing this ceremony to try and purify the place. Fortunately, I hadn't heard about burning sage yet, because burning sage always gives me a headache. I don't like using that. This incense is good enough, in my opinion. So, I mean, maybe it worked. I mean, it was like the heavy vibe seemed to have lifted somewhat, although it could have just been like a placebo effect. But I didn't have any problems with malevolent entities in that apartment. Possibly because I did the chanting. So, yeah, I think I answered that question. It's time to move on to the next one. So let's do that. And the next question is from Dhamma River. And Dhamma River asked me a question in the previous Q&A about the 18 faults of a monastery, that is a kind of subsection in the Visuddhimagga. And he called it a chapter in the Visuddhimagga. I went through the table of contents and just did not find any chapter about the faults of a monastery. So, I said as much I had read it many years ago as a young monk, and then it just slipped my mind. So anyways, Dhamma River says, if you wish to read it and answer the question on your next Q&A, I would be very grateful. If you can't, that's okay as well. Thank you, Venerable Punyavasa. And so there's this subsection in the Visuddhimagga about the 18 kinds of monastery that a monk should not live at. And the list is, here's what it says. Herein, one that is unfavorable has any one of 18 faults. These are largeness, newness, dilapidatedness, a nearby road, a pond, edible leaves, flowers, fruits, famousness, a nearby city, nearby timber trees, nearby arable fields, presence of incompatible persons, a nearby port of entry, nearness to the border countries, nearness to the frontier of a kingdom, unsuitability, lack of good friends, One, and it says, one with any of these faults is not favorable. He should not live there. And I've probably lived at pretty much all of these kinds of monasteries before. And I mean, you rule out all of these kind of monasteries, and there's not a whole heck of a lot left. I mean, you can't live in a monastery that's big. You can't live in a monastery that's near a road. You can't live in a monastery that's, nearness to the border countries or nearness to the frontier of a kingdom. And one of the reasons for nearness to the border countries or nearness to the frontier of a kingdom is, I mean, first of all, you can have like barbarian invasions, hostile kings sweeping through with his armies, but also a lot of the people aren't Buddhist out on the frontier. And I mean, that's pretty much everywhere outside of Buddhist Asia. Any kind of monastery in America would fall under this category of a place that a monk shouldn't live at. So it's like, let's see, a large monastery, there's all kinds of commotion going on, lots of visitors and so forth. I stayed at a monastery where the Sangha of monks and novices spending the rains retreat there was 1,500, give or take 100 or so. So I've stayed at one of those. Newness, it's mainly new monasteries are not considered to be good because they're always under construction, and just about any monastery in Burma is under construction. They're always like collecting donations to build a new monastery. I remember at Chanmye Yita in Rangoon, which is one of the meditation centers in the Mahasi tradition, that they had just completely filled their property with buildings, so that they had gotten to the point where if they were going to build a new building, they had to tear down a pre-existing one just to build a new one. But that's what they were doing. Let's see, nearby road. I mean, just about any monastery is going to have a nearby road at this point. But I mean, it's like too many visitors. You got a nearby road, a pond. I think the pond is people coming to get water. You know, it'd be like a lake, any kind of body of fresh water. I mean, I've lived at places like that. I mean, I lived at, one of the main monasteries that I lived at was Wonbo Wildlife Refuge Monastery, Wonbo Bemet Do Jaun, which is on the banks of the Chinbun River. Although I guess with a river, you could have the villagers who would just be going to that part of the river that was closer to the village and farther away from the monastery or some such. Edible leaves, because women will come and pick the leaves to make salads for their family, and they'll be singing songs in lilting female voices that will distract the concentration of the monks and possibly lead them astray. Flowers and fruits, it's the same thing. I mean, like Wonbo Bemet Do Jaun, I mean, it was a lot of thick grass down by the river, and there'd be women coming to cut the grass to take home to their cattle. There was fruit trees, mango trees, and other kinds of trees growing there. So it's like, I mean, just about any monastery is going to have like 4 or 5 strikes against it going with this list. A nearby city, or I mean, for that matter, a monastery that's in a city would be even worse. Nearby timber trees, woodcutters coming and just wreaking havoc. Nearby fields. I mean, this is pretty much ruling out just about every monastery. I mean, the only place where you could live following this list would be just out in the middle of a desert with no roads or anything. There'd be no people there either. They're in this, I mean, there's no point in going on through the whole 18, but even the Visuddhimagga itself does say that like a new monastery, you can stay at a new monastery if there are like lay people volunteering to do the construction work, but then there's still going to be all this hammering and pounding. I remember I was staying at Pandita Rama in Rangoon, also in the Mahasi tradition, and the Burmese in general, they like noise. It doesn't bother them. In fact, some people prefer noise. And so Upandita was having, I mean, of course, they're building a new building there. And he had this worker pounding out sheet metal gutters just below the eaves of the meditation hall. So there's literally a guy just right outside the meditation hall pounding on sheet metal with a hammer. And it used to bother me. I mean, Westerners in general don't like noise nearly as much as, Burmese people, for example. And one time during an interview, I mentioned that noise that usually bothered me, I just hit this zone in my meditation where it was just like going through me, just like light going through a pane of glass. Just the sound of the pounding sheet metal was just going in one ear and out the other, and it didn't bother me at all. And when I mentioned this, U Pandita, who didn't like me very much, I mean, he visibly and audibly sucked air through his teeth, like he just wanted to pounce and just lay into me and just chew me out. But he couldn't because I said that it didn't bother me. But good luck finding a monastery that doesn't have any of these 18 faults. That your best bet is just, I mean, if you're going to be a monk living in a monastery, even like a lay meditator staying at a monastery, just shop around, look for monasteries. The monasteries that aren't on this list, you're not going to find them. I mean, they're not going to be famous. They're not going to be near a road. So just go to a number of different monasteries, or just go to monasteries until you find the place that just feels right. And then try that. Because if you follow this, you're just never going to find a good place, probably. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. Also from Dhamma River. And Dhamma River says, in the suttas, fortunate people were able to meet the Buddha and ask him questions. If miraculously you were able to meet the Buddha today and ask him a question for which he would answer with a discourse, what question would you ask the Blessed One? And if I were in the presence of the Buddha, I would be very humble. And the only question I could really ask is, you know better than I do what I need to know. Please tell me that. What should I do? I mean, I just have this feeling if I said, what should I do? The Buddha would just say, you already know. So yeah, that's really the only question I could ask him is like, you know better than I do what I need to hear. So please tell me what I need to hear. Because I wouldn't want to bias it with like preconceived preferences and that kind of thing. Like I read the autobiography of Ajahn Mun, or the biography. No, I think it was the autobiography of Ajahn Mun, where he meets with the Buddha somehow, and he asks him one question, which was with regard to what was the color that monks dyed their robes in the Buddha's time. I mean, why would you get one question? It's sort of like there's a genie, you get one wish. And I want to know what color the robes were in ancient India in the Buddhist time. It's like, I just don't get that one. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Xenothoid. And I'm going to check, make sure we are in fact recording. And yes, we are in fact recording. Xenothoid says, can you give your opinion on the divide amongst the political right between traditionalists and futurists? And I've never heard of this divide. I mean, I don't read like right-wing websites, that kind of stuff. I don't study up on like right-wing politics, really. I'm really not right-wing. I've taken some of those political compass tests, and I generally tend to be in the center, very close to the center. And I mean, it's sort of like a classical liberal, not so different from a libertarian, that kind of thing. So, I mean, I really don't know. I mean, I can understand just sort of using my knowledge of politics in general to know what a traditionalist is. I mean, that's a conservative. A conservative is trying to conserve traditions. But a futurist, a right-wing futurist, I'm not exactly sure what that would mean. And I mean, it seems to me that a lot of people don't even know what right wing really means. Like on the left, like the globalist leftists, they'll just call anyone who disagrees with them right wing. You know, they'll call Nazis far right when really, I mean, the National Socialist German Workers' Party of, you know, early to mid 20th century Germany, I mean, they were technically socialists. I mean, it was right there in the name of the party. It is true, though, that the Führer really didn't care much about economics, and so I mean, I've heard like Nazism referred to as radical centrism because it really wasn't that far right. But I mean, what is far right? It's like the best way I could come up with. I've written an essay on this, just trying to wrap my head around what right wing really means, because the left wing is uncontroversial. Hard right would be communism. I mean, that's uncontroversial. Pretty much everyone agrees that the far left would be communists. But what is the opposite of communists? Right? I mean, say in communism, there is no personal property. So the opposite of that would be everything is personal property. And it's like communism, I mean, Karl Marx, and also like the Antifa people, they seem to have this idea that pure communism would be anarchistic. But I mean, it's just unrealistic. Anarcho-communism is like an oxymoron. It's like a contradiction in terms, because communism is in this flagrant like disharmony with human nature, which I guess is one reason why hard leftists deny the existence of human nature. But I mean, communism is so like at odds with human nature that it has to be enforced at gunpoint by like a strong centralized government. And that's one of the, like the farther left you go, the more you want the government controlling everything. So anarchism would be more towards the right, it seems to me, anarchistic capitalism. What, ANCAPs, is that what they're called? That would be like far right. But then some things that are associated with the far right are like the strong dictator type. That's sort of fascism. But then again, fascism isn't all that far right either. Like the original fascist party of Italy, led by Benito Mussolini, it was like an offshoot of the Marxist, like the Communist Party, that they split over whether or not Italy should get involved in World War I. So even like the strong man, charismatic leader isn't necessarily, I mean, it's an aspect of fascism, but it's not necessarily an aspect of far right politics. That a strong centralized government seems to be more a left-wing thing. But let's just give the communists the benefit of the doubt. And let's just say that as you go farther and farther left, into socialism, before you get to communism, the government gets bigger and stronger and more centralized until finally it just poofs out of existence when you reach the end. Let's just assume that for the sake of argument. Then the opposite of that would be the government gets weaker and less centralized until you get to the extreme far right, and then all of a sudden you've got a totalitarian dictator. And that could be the way it is. I mean, if you've got less and less structure, so that you wind up with a kind of feudalism or law of the jungle, where all of a sudden, you got like this feudalistic society, or just like a anarchistic or libertarian society, then you're just going to have like the most ruthless shark is just going to like take over and just gobble up everything and become like an autark. But I'm just completely straying away from the question. Let's just get back to the question. Can you give your opinion on the divide amongst the political right between traditionalists and futurists? And I really don't know what that divide really is, because I'm not sure what a futurist right-winger would be. And I'm not even sure what zenithoid even means when he refers to the political right, because the political right is just this nebulous this nebulous concept or semi-concept that very few people try to pin down and like define it precisely, which is just weird because, as I've been saying, the far left is just uncontroversial communism. What's the opposite of communism? Anarchistic capitalism, just libertarianism, feudalism, like medieval style feudalism. There's different ways of like finding the opposite of the left. Futuristic feudalism, I'm not exactly sure what that would entail. So, I mean, if you got futurists, right-wing futurists, they're just kind of have to cook up some new tradition. They just want to invent some new tradition, but inventing new stuff is more progressive than conservative. So just futurism, I mean, it seems to have one foot in the left already, just in its eagerness for change. But I don't know. So I'm really not an authority on right-wing politics. I do not consider myself to be particularly right-wing, although a lot of people would. So I think I'm just going to have to move on to the next question, which is along the same lines. Do you fall more into the traditionalist camp or the futurist camp? And kind of neither, because like I say, I'm really not particularly right-wing as far as I can tell, although like far lefties would just consider me to be just fascist. But then again, fascism isn't necessarily right-wing either. So, I mean, I'm not really a traditionalist or a futurist. I'm more of like classical libertarian, which will have some tradition and some adaptation. You know, like the Romans, I mean, they were pretty conservative, but nevertheless, if they came across a good idea amongst Greeks or barbarians or whatever, they would adopt it, especially with regard to like warfare. You know, it's like if they're, you know, they start fighting in Spain and the Spanish swords are really nice. So they started using the gladius, or they started having a war against the Dacians, and the Dacians had this weapon called the falx that was hooked, and they'd kind of reach behind it and like come from behind and like be cutting the Roman soldiers the back of their neck that was relatively unguarded. So the Romans had just changed their armor to protect themselves from that sort of thing. You know, they adopted a lot of stuff from the Greeks and from the Etruscans. So I don't know if that's exactly futuristic, but at least it's opportunistic. That you don't want to just adhere so firmly to your traditions that you reject improvements on the system. And improvements on the system would be along the lines of technology, especially technology. If you go Amish, your existence as a world power is very, very short term. So I wouldn't consider myself a traditionalist or a futurist necessarily. And I'm just going to move on to Xenothoid's third question, which is along the same. I really don't know what a futurist right-winger would be. He says, does the divide between futurists and traditionalists on the political right exist at all within Buddhist countries, or is it mainly a European or American phenomenon? I would expect it to exist in advanced countries like Japan and China, but I would be surprised if it existed in places like Thailand or Burma. I never heard of really right-wing politics in Burma other than the military dictatorship, maybe. I mean, that's more left-wing than right-wing. I mean, Burmese politics is kind of hard to pin down because the government really doesn't have much power outside of the main cities. Or if there's an army base or a police base, you know, the area right around that will be under the control of the government. But out in the villages, the Burmese are governed more by tradition than by the government. It's just the tradition, the way things have been for 1,000 years is just the way it keeps going. And you've got like the village headman, and he's in charge of maintaining order in the village. You've got a thief or something, then he'll call in some village like a posse, and then they'll go out and deal with it. So, yeah, abstract political theories. I assume there's like university educated people in Burma that think about this kind of stuff, but even I don't think about this kind of stuff. At least I've never been exposed to futuristic right-wing politics. I don't know what it would be exactly. Unless it's just technological improvements on like old style right-wing politics. And even that, again, what exactly is right-wing politics is controversial, just because right-wingers just haven't bothered to really just lay down the law, just like define what it is to be right-wing, and different right-wingers would define it differently. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but it may be that this whole right-wing, like the futurists, the divide between futurists and traditionalists on the political right is more of an European thing than an American thing, or it's just a niche thing that, you know, is of interest to a few people, but it never really gets into the mainstream. At least I do not recall any coming across any of this kind of stuff. So, with all due respects to Xenothoid and his fascination for the divide in right-wing politics in the West, I'm going to just move on to the next question. And this is an obscure Vinaya question that is right up my alley. This question is from Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Libra Lamb, etc., etc., etc. And he says, what does it mean for one to eat their alms in order? And this is one of the Sekya rules. It's, you know, a monk is supposed to eat his food systematically, like in order. And what that means, at least traditionally in Theravada Buddhism, you got a bowl of food sitting in front of you. You just start on one side of the bowl and you just eat across like this. And when you're done, it's just like there's like this little wall where you stopped eating. There's, you know, like this neat line. At least that's the way I used to eat. And I got paid this compliment as a junior monk once, that there was like this lady on the board of directors saw my bowl after I'd finished eating, and she says, Tom Seattle used to eat that way. Where, you know, it's just, you could, when he finished eating, it was just like this, you know, it's just like this straight line where he stopped eating. So yeah, that's what it means to eat in order, at least traditionally. According to tradition, you just start on one side and eat your way over. You're not like picking and choosing the stuff that you like, is essentially the purpose of it. You just eat it as it comes. Although you can cheat a little bit. Like if there's something you really don't like, you just move that over to the other side of the bowl, or you just turn the bowl so that the food you don't like is on the side you're not going to get to. That kind of thing. But yeah, there's another one, eating food in proportion, which is kind of controversial. My understanding of that is you just eat it in the proportion that is given to you, like rice and curry. You know, you get mostly rice and a little bit of curry, then you eat mostly rice and a little bit of curry. You don't just take all the curry and mix it in with the rice and just leave plain white rice behind as leftovers, that kind of thing. So, after that satisfying, obscure question on monastic discipline, which, I mean, if you don't do that, just because it's a Sekya rule, you're not necessarily breaking a rule. You're only breaking the rule if you do it just on purpose, knowing that it's against the rules and not giving a damn. Then it's a dukkha offense, which is the most minor category of ecclesiastical offense. But some monk who's ignorant, who shouldn't be because it's one of the Patimokkha rules. But, I mean, if he's not doing it on purpose, or he's like violently allergic to bamboo shoots or something and takes those out, then fine. Personally, I don't like bamboo shoots because I stayed at this one place out in the forest, living in a cave on the outskirts of the national park, where during the rainy season, it's like everyone and her sister is giving me bamboo shoots, and I just completely burned out on them. And to this day, I still don't like bamboo shoots. So, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Harim Kathul. And Harim Kathul says, Did followers of Christ distort and misunderstand his ideas after his death? It seems to me that the core teachings of Jesus resemble dharmic understanding of religion quite a bit. The rabid devotionalism, dogmatism, egalitarianism, and missionary character of Orthodox Christianity evokes disgust in me, however. Well, of course, the followers of Christ distorted and misunderstood his ideas after his death. The followers of the Buddha misunderstood and distorted his ideas after the Buddha's passing from this earth. I mean, it just happens. You take an enlightened teaching or just a very wise teaching, and it just kind of gets inherited by less wise, less enlightened people. They're going to muck it up. If you're lucky, they'll at least not change the old wise stuff. They'll just add new foolish stuff to it. But, I mean, I think Harim Cthulhu may be kind of overestimating early Christianity in this case. Like devotionalism, I mean, they were worshiping God. I mean, Jesus himself was a monotheist. You know, worshiping God, praying to God. There's a lot of advice about praying. In fact, one of my favorite bits of advice from Jesus on praying is it's sort of like somebody pounding on your door in the middle of the night. You know, they've got company comes over. They don't have any bread to feed the company. They come over to your house and they're knocking on your door. You don't want to get up. But if they just keep pounding, sooner or later, you're going to get up. You might not be in a good mood. You might not be happy about it, but you're going to get up and answer the door. And that's Jesus says you should pray that way. Just pester God until he gives you what you want, just to get some peace and quiet, essentially. So devotionalism, I'm sure that was in the original OG Christianity. Dogmatism, well, you got the Old Testament dogma that was inherited by the Christians. So, I mean, Jesus said he wasn't going to change one jot or tittle of like the old Mosaic law, that sort of thing. So that could be considered dogmatic. Egalitarianism, according to the Acts of the Apostles, the first Christian community in Jerusalem was essentially communist. They just donated their assets to the group and it was divided according to need. So that's pretty communistic. And with a small group of voluntary communists, it can work, especially if they're being spiritual and trying to reduce I, me, mine, personal property and all that, then it can work. But when you try to enforce it on like a national scale, when most people are not particularly wise, and communism just goes against human nature anyway, it's just not going to work nearly as well. Missionary character, I mean, that's one of the things that one of the things that Jesus was telling his disciples. Just go out and spread the gospel. Heal the sick, cast out demons, and spread the gospel. So, I mean, Jesus was essentially a Jew, and Christianity is a schismatic sect of Judaism. One could argue that Marxism also is a kind of schismatic sect of Judaism. So, but it seems to me that Jesus was just ahead of his time, or was ahead of his culture in first century Judea or Galilee, that even his own apostles apparently didn't understand him. So, I mean, it was a relatively short time before he was deified. And, I mean, Jesus probably considered himself to be the Messiah. I used to be skeptical of that. I used to think that they just kind of monkeyed with the details of his life to try and, force fit him into the prophecies of the Messiah. But the more I've heard about Jesus and like the history of the early church, the more it seems that Jesus probably did really consider himself to be the promised Messiah, even though he knew well enough that the details of his life did not fit all the prophecies. Like, he probably knew that he was born in Galilee and not in Bethlehem. and that his mother was not a virgin. I mean, he had several brothers and sisters. So, just getting to the question though, did followers of Christ distort and misunderstand his ideas after his death? Sure. Even to some degree before his death. And the same thing has happened with Buddhism too, although maybe not, well, I mean, probably to a similar degree. Let's just put it that way. So, I mean, even the Protestant Christians still just follow like the New Testament. They dismiss the Apocrypha or the pseudo-epigraphic, what is it? The Deuterocanonicals. You know, the Catholics will accept what the Protestants reject, some of the books of the Bible, you know, the book of Tobit in the Old Testament, that kind of thing. But even Protestant Christians follow pretty much the same scriptures as, you know, the representatives of the oldest schools of Christianity that have been here for, you know, 2,000 years, like Greek Orthodox, for example, or the Syrian Church or the Coptic Church, you know, Catholics. But in Buddhism, the new schools of Buddhism, sort of like the Buddhist Protestants, they just cooked up an entire library of new sayings of the Buddha, which, I mean, that's going way beyond what the Christians did. I mean, the Mormons kind of cooked up some new stuff, but yeah, I think the Buddhists may have gone even farther with regard to distorting and misunderstanding the ideas of their founder. Although I do not think that Jesus considered himself to be the Son of God, and that you can only be saved through believing in Jesus. I don't think that Jesus went quite that far. So I think that's an early distortion of Christianity. But I think I should just move on to the next question. This is also from Harim Cthulhu. And he's saying, should higher teachings be restricted to an elite? The Bhagavad Gita warns against teaching it to those who are not worthy. In my opinion, Hinduism would have degenerated into a Christian-like religion very quickly if the interpretation of the Vedas was left up to Shudras and Dalits, or outcasts. That is more or less what has happened for almost 2 centuries now. There's no shortage of verses in the Vedas that can be interpreted as radically egalitarian by fools. Well, even in Christianity, you know, Jesus had that saying about don't cast pearls before swine, because, you know, the swine will just turn and rend you after trampling the pearls into the mud. And yeah, I mean, should higher teachings be restricted to an elite? I think so, yes. It's like the Upanishads. They started off as secret teachings. I mean, Upanishad literally means sitting up close to, because it was like a secret teaching that your teacher would tell you, like quietly, like practically whispering it into your ear, and you had to purify yourself for years before you would be worthy. Like the Buddhist teachings, now you can just get it free on the internet. But it used to be that monks, you have to be ordained, and then they'd have to study it. You know, they'd be living a life of purity and so forth. They had to be worthy of learning this stuff. And then the stuff they would teach to the lay people would be like the elementary superficial stuff suited for illiterate subsistence farmers in the ancient Ganges Valley, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I do have a certain respect for the idea that certain like advanced teachings that aren't even going to be understood by like common normie who might just consider it bullshit, or he might think that he gets it, but when he really doesn't. But I mean, there is something to be said for the idea that you should be worthy of hearing like very advanced teachings. You know, you should purify yourself so that when the pure nectar of the teachings are poured into you, the vessel isn't all just like caked with mud, which turns the nectar into just sludge as soon as it goes in. You take pure water, pour it into a dirty cup, and it becomes dirty. And it's the same way you take pure, like, spiritual philosophy, pour it into a dirty mind, it becomes dirty. So, I mean, we're pretty much stuck with the way it is now. I don't think sacred texts are going to be purged from the internet anytime soon. So, it can go either way, but I do have a certain, I think it's probably more appropriate that only people who prove themselves worthy should be given the higher teachings. And it reminds me of like the pilot episode of Kung Fu. Little Kwai Chang Caine, he wants to be a Shaolin monk. So he stands out in the sun and rain outside the monastery gates, humbly waiting to be invited in. And he just stands there day after day, rain or shine, just stands there. Even the boys, there's some other boys that are doing the same thing, but if it starts raining hard, they'll go and stand under a tree. They'll get sent away. Or they start like giggling and playing and stuff amongst themselves. They get sent away. Little Kwai Chang Caine had to just stand there, just stolid in the sun and rain for it was like 2 weeks, I think, before they finally invite him in. And then he gets another test. There's like 3 boys that passed this first test. They get invited in. They get invited to have tea with the abbot. So the abbot pours tea for the 3 boys. And 2 boys, not Kwai Chang, but the other 2, start drinking the tea. But Kwai Chang just sits there in front of the teacup and doesn't touch it. So the abbot says, "Why aren't you drinking your tea?" And then little Kwai Chang says, "After you, venerable sir." And then the abbot drinks some tea, and then Kwai Chang starts drinking it. And then the abbot is interested in Kwai Chang, partly because he's like half American. He's like a half barbarian. But his Chinese grandfather taught him correct manners and so forth. So he's the only one who passed. The other 2 boys who drank the tea first got sent home. So, I mean, if it was like that in the West, there'd be damn few people learning Dhamma, though. It might be better that way in a certain way. It might be a purer kind of Dhamma. But still, I mean, there's pros and cons to both ways. But I do think that it is good that, I mean, like Jesus said, it's better not to cast pearls before swine. Because, I mean, it can harm them too. If you hear some profound philosophy, but your mind is so like blinded by defilements that you just reject it as utter bullshit and maybe even sneer at it, then, I mean, you're making bad karma for yourself. At least the guy who's doing the sneering is. It may be that the person who shared that advanced philosophy, he did it in a spirit of goodwill and maybe overestimated the wisdom of the person he was telling and that sort of thing. But nowadays, there's not much purity testing for higher wisdom. It's mainly just purity testing to be found worthy of being a leftist. And if you say the wrong thing, then you get attacked. And I'm just going to move on to this question after throwing a little postmodern politics into there. So, next question from Harim Cthulhu. Do you consider the Emperor Julian to be a hero? And it turns out there were two emperors named Julian. One of them is very obscure. He wasn't emperor for very long. He was after Pertinax, I think, and before Septimius Severus. And he lasted just a short time and then was slaughtered by the Praetorian Guard. But the one that Harim Cthulhu here is referring to is Julian the Apostate, the last pagan emperor of Rome. And do I consider him a hero? He was like a fighter for a lost cause. He was a heroic champion of a lost cause. So whether he's a hero or not, it depends on, the attitude of the person who hears about Julian the Apostate. A devout Christian would consider him to be like an antichrist or something. But it's really too bad that Julian died after being emperor for only like 2 years. He caught a spear in a war with the Persians. And there are some people who think that it was probably some Christian Roman soldier who harpooned him rather than a Persian soldier. But he was he knew from like past history in Rome that violently persecuting Christians just kind of like, it's like compacting a snowball. It just toughens them up and makes them more determined. It's like you get more holy martyrs, that kind of thing. So he was trying a kind of soft persecution, just preventing them from getting like government jobs and government educations, or just not allowing them into like the philosophical academies and so forth. And I think he might have done well to just enforce the Christian idea that, gather not up your treasures upon the earth. And to some degree, I think he did kind of, was confiscating wealth from kind of bogus Christians who, to this day, gather not up your treasures upon the earth is probably one of the most ignored teachings of biblical Christianity among Christians. That devout Christians, even like fundamentalist Christians, are still making as much money as they can and getting filthy rich if they are capable of getting filthy rich. Not all of them. There are some who are living in voluntary poverty, and they have earned my respect for doing that. So Emperor Julian, he was trying to sort of turn paganism into like a more viable alternative to Christianity, like injecting some wisdom through Neoplatonism and requiring pagan priests to have certain like a standard of virtue, uphold a standard of virtue like Christian priests were supposed to do. Because in Julian's time, the late Roman Empire, paganism was almost amoral. That like Julius Caesar or a lot of people, they just get appointed like these high. I think Julius Caesar was actually, what is it? What's the Pope called? Oh man. Pontifex Maximus. It's like the chief priest of like Jupiter. It's like, it was like a political thing, and people, it was like politicians would just kind of boost their status without really living a holy life. It's just, that's the way paganism had become. It was just kind of a secular superstition thing rather than any kind of like transcendent dharmic kind of a thing. And Christianity had more of that transcendent aspect than paganism, especially mainstream paganism. You had some mystery cults and so forth that were more towards purification and so forth. Things like schools like Orphism, that kind of thing. But they really weren't all that mainstream. So Julian was trying to mainstream a more advanced kind of paganism, and it just didn't work. And as he was dying, he didn't appoint his successor. He just let the army decide who was going to be the next emperor. And it was some popular officer named Jovian, who was a Christian, and there weren't any more pagan emperors after Julian. Which is too bad. I think the West might have turned into something that I would find more interesting, more engaging, if like some kind of Neoplatonism had become the mass religion of the West instead of Christianity, which is a schismatic sect of Judaism. But do I consider Emperor Julian to be a hero? Yeah, he was kind of a hero, but he was a failed hero fighting for a lost cause. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Siovach and Sipad Zidana. And Siovach and Sipad Zidana says, how similar were the samurai and the kshatriya, like their duties, codes of honor, etc.? And I really can't answer this question very, very well, because I'm no authority on samurai and the kshatriya. In fact, I probably know more about the samurai with regard to their codes of honor and so forth than the kshatriya varna or caste of ancient India. Because, I don't recall ever reading any code of honor. You read the Pali text, there might be a little bit about kshatriyas and sort of like the Buddha as a boy and a young man, some of the stuff he would have to learn, You'd have to learn archery and horsemanship and, like military strategy and also like poetry and this kind of stuff, which would be similar. I mean, there's probably a lot of similarity, sort of parallel evolution of the warrior caste, the warrior class of medieval Japan and ancient North India. So there's probably a lot of similarities. That it was like the warrior and to some degree the ruling class, especially in India. In medieval Japan, like the emperor, I don't think he was of the samurai class, but he was just sort of like this obscure figure, sort of, no, I almost said like Joe Biden or something, but I mean, he wasn't really running the show a lot of the time. You'd have like the shogun who was of the samurai class. So there's that. With regard to the code of honor, I really don't know what the code of honor for the Indian Kshatriyas would be. There might be some famous text out there laying down, in black and white, what the duties of a good Kshatriya would be. But other than that, you just pick up little bits and pieces from other things that you read. Just this information is just incidental to what you're reading about something else. So I really can't say, but it does seem that there was a lot of overlap. It was like parallel evolution. They were essentially occupying the same ecological niche in their respective societies, and it just kind of produced the same sort of phenomenon. I don't think that Kshatriyas were as likely to use peasants for target practice and that kind of thing, like sometimes you hear about the samurai. Whereas to some degree, the samurai were considered like the Spartans, and everyone else in society were helots, where it was just open season. You could just treat them however you pleased. That, I don't know if the samurai themselves, I mean, there was Bushido, but I would assume that different samurai in like different areas of Japan would have different ideas about codes of honor and so forth, what their duties should be, that sort of thing. But a samurai he had to have allegiance to a lord. I'm not sure the Kshatriyas were that way. You were just kind of born that way. And I mean, you might be a good Kshatriya or a bad Kshatriya, but I don't think there was any like stigma of being like Ronin, like in the samurai, where your leader, the person that you have dedicated your life to, gets overthrown or assassinated or whatever. And then it's like a stigma on the Ronin. It was like a slur calling them Ronin. And I forgot to jiggle the mouse, as is usually the case. And so my sweetie's computer screen, let's see. Her computer screen went dark. Oh, there we go. Because that's sort of like ambient lighting to highlight my blemishes and wounds and so forth. So let's see here. CEO of Action, CPOT 0, second question. Compare and this is like a test question. Compare and contrast the republics around the time of the Buddha to the Roman Republic. Well, again, it's like knowledge of the political situation, or really like anything remotely resembling a kind of constitution, is very scanty with regard to ancient India, much more so than in ancient Rome. Ancient Rome, we got a pretty good idea. I'm pretty sure they didn't have a written constitution like the United States has a written constitution, but they did have these traditions that were considered to be binding. Like two consuls, how often different offices would be re-elected, just different positions. You had the quaestors and I won't go into it. But with regard to ancient India, they didn't keep records nearly as well as the ancient Greeks and Romans did. It's just kind of a European thing, objective record keeping. And also we're Europeans pretty much. And so Europeans have been very interested in European history for longer than they've been interested in Indian history. So stuff has been dug up and discovered and learned in the West that hasn't been dug up and discovered and learned in India. But it is true, like it has been said that Indian history didn't even exist until the British came along and invented it after they colonized India. Because the Indians just really weren't into the same kind of historical record keeping as Europeans have been. Not all Europeans, but especially like Greeks and Romans. So I think the republics around the time of the Buddha were more like oligarchies ruled by the Kshatriya class, maybe with, like Brahmin priests advising them, that kind of thing. But I really don't know if they had the same sort of that complex, like what do you call it? Just the balance, making sure that like one person won't just take control of the government. That's why you had two consuls, and you'd have just checks and balances and so forth. And I just get the idea just from reading the Pali texts that a republic in the Ganges Valley in the Buddhist time was mainly just an oligarchy of Kshatriya males who would just meet in like a council and come up with their ideas, kind of like early medieval Poland. I think it was early medieval Poland where it was just like the nobles would all meet on horseback out in a field and come to their decisions that way. That, in India, I assume it would be less sophisticated than, the elaborate political code of the Roman Republic. That it would be more just a matter of a group of people making decisions in some council hall rather than just one king or emperor making decisions. So I'm just going to move on to CO of Action, CPAD Zedina's third question, which is, what are your thoughts on Plato's noble lie? And I first heard about Plato's noble lie from Bubbles on Trailer Park Boys. He talked about Plato's noble lie when advising Ricky, I think. But it turns out that Plato's noble lie is the idea that a government does well to promote certain myths, like religious myths, for the sake of like unifying and strengthening the nation. And this just falls back on something that I have said numerous times, that as a young man, I pretty much lost interest in politics when I fully realized that what is good and right from a political point of view isn't necessarily good and right from a spiritual point of view. So from a spiritual point of view, lying is wrong. But from a political point of view, it may be that sometimes lying is the right thing to do. It's not dharmic. It's not wholesome. That the people doing it are probably going to make some bad karma for themselves. But still, from a political point of view, it may be of advantage to a society to believe in certain myths that unifies the people and gives them the same general world view. And it might not be entirely true, like Romulus and Remus being raised by a she-wolf, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's probably more to the advantage politically to a government to just promote that and go along with it than to say, nah, it didn't really happen. So I guess those are my thoughts on Plato's noble lie. I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Philalethes. And Philalethes says, favorite languages and where would you rank Pali? Well, I'm not a philologist. I am not a linguist. I only speak one language really fluently, and that is English. I speak Burmese well enough to get by. I know Pali well enough that, especially if I'm armed with a Pali English dictionary, I can translate texts from Pali into English. Also, I have a Pali grammar, which is very nice. A little bit of Spanish, un poquito, but I really can't say. I mean, my favorite language would have to be English. English is a good language. It's a weird language. It's unnecessarily complicated. Like in Burmese, you've got good, more good, most good. And it's like all the adjectives just fit into this. Good, gooder, goodest. It's easy. In English, it's good, better, best. You can't say gooder. You can't say goodest. Or you can, but it's wrong. And just the spelling is weird. It's based on like the pronunciation of Old English or something. So, but nevertheless, English is a powerful language. But with regard to what I consider to be the best languages, to some degree, I would defer to Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer said that in order to be really literate and educated in his day, like the early 1800s, you had to be fluent in, it was like 9 languages, 8 or 9 languages. I mean, there was like ancient Latin and Greek. You had to know those. Any educated person had to know Latin and Greek up until the 20th century, probably. Then there was German, French, English, and Italian. So that's German, English, Italian. Yeah, maybe it was 6 languages, plus Latin and Greek. And according to Schopenhauer, I think he said the ancient Greek or classical Greek, Attic Greek, was the most perfect language. That you can say things more precisely and concisely in Greek than in any other language, like classical Attic Greek. And then second place he gave to German. But I really can't say. I really do not know much Greek at all. Even less German, probably. So I guess English is my favorite language. And with regard to Pali, it's kind of an easy language. It's kind of like Spanish. It follows rules fairly well. If you know how to pronounce something, you generally have a pretty good idea as to how to spell it. That kind of thing. It's kind of a nice language. I prefer it to Burmese. I think I prefer it to Spanish. It's a nice language. It's a simplified version of Sanskrit, or rather, it's based on Vedic Sanskrit, but it's much simpler, more streamlined than classical Sanskrit, which is a language that I know some words. To the extent that it's parallel or the same as Pali. That much of it I understand with regard to grammar, but I guess I've read that Pali was designed as a kind of lingua franca for Buddhist monks in India. And where would I rank it? Well, I guess of the languages I'm familiar with, it'd have to be my second favorite language after English. And so I'm just going to move on to Phil Lathy's second question, which is a question that I answered relatively recently. Tolstoy or Dostoevsky? And the answer was Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky is my favorite novelist, my favorite writer of fiction. And The Idiot by Dostoevsky is probably my favorite novel. War and Peace is nothing to sneeze your nose at. I'm not saying Tolstoy is a hack writer by any stretch of the imagination. But Dostoevsky, my heart goes out to Dostoevsky. And it's hard not to love Dostoevsky because, he was a tortured soul. He was kind of like Michelangelo. Just, the whole idea that you have to suffer to create. Dostoevsky was that guy. His life was just a shambles. It's like close family members dying. He was hopelessly addicted to gambling, roulette to be specific. He was always in debt, just like fleeing from people that he owed money to. This kind of stuff. He had epilepsy. All this stuff going wrong. He spent years in a Siberian prison camp after being reprieved, he was almost standing in front of the firing squad. He was actually there at the place where people are executed, waiting in line to be shot before he receives this reprieve from the Tsar, just saying, okay, you just got to go and spend a few years in a prison camp in Siberia instead. So it was like Dostoevsky understood the divinity that lurks inside the human heart, despite all the filth and sordidness. It's just kind of strange that Dostoevsky he portrays people with all the warts, all the blemishes, and he was really insightful with regard to human nature. He was sort of like a psychologist before psychology was even really invented. Tolstoy was a wise man, but I think Dostoevsky has him beat. And I'm just going to move on to Phil Lathy's third question, which is, in your estimation, how different would the USA look today had the Confederacy won the war? Well, that's kind of a difficult question because it's conjecture. You just have to guess. I don't think the southern states, assuming that they broke away, I don't think they'd still have slavery. But in all likelihood, they would have probably deported all of the freed slaves either to some country in Africa like Liberia, or then, sort of like the bleeding heart liberals of the northern states, the Yankees, would have taken all these freed slaves and had rampant violent crime and so forth. So let's see here. What else? What other differences? I don't think the southern states would ever really become like a world power. They might be prosperous, relatively powerful, a force to be reckoned with, but still, I don't think that they would be like as powerful as the northern states, because the northern states had the industry and the population and that sort of thing that just made them more stronger. And it may be that there'd be at least another war between North and South, just due to friction or animosity smoldering. Or who knows, maybe the northern states would just sort of incorporate Canada or something. I don't know. It's all conjecture. You can't really say. But whether the United States would become a superpower if the southern states had successfully broken away, and I'm living in South Carolina, the very first state to secede from the Union, it's hard to say. It really is. All it would take is one little butterfly effect and chaos theory to take effect, and just this hardly noticeable little change can result in some huge difference, 100 years down the road. So it's just hard to say, although I can say with fair confidence that the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America, wouldn't have slaves nowadays. That's just slavery. It pretty much ran its course, except for in a few Muslim, third world nations or something. And I don't think the South would really equal the North with regard to power and influence on the global scale. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Siddhartha Lohachita. And his first question, I should say, given the overwhelming references to kings, princes, kshatriyas, and brahmins in the Pali Canon, would Buddhist rule be considered what liberals might call an absolute monarchy? Well, I don't think so, because, the Buddha himself, even though he's called a royal prince, the historians, the experts would say that the city-state of Kapilavatthu was more of an oligarchy ruled by this council of elders like kshatriyas, the ruling class, kind of like Athens maybe. It would be more towards like an early primitive kind of democracy than like monarchy. Also, the Buddha supposedly based the governance of the Sangha on one of these oligarchies, or it was like a democratic kind of oligarchy where it was like democratic consensus or democratic majority of, these upper class males who were running the country. So I think it was the Mala Republic. Don't quote me on that. But it was one of these republics that the Buddha thought was a good way of running a country, that he sort of modeled the Sangha. And the Sangha is based on consensus. Like, if you've got a formal act of the Sangha, like they're going to ordain somebody or whatever it is, all the monks at the monastery have to agree. The most junior monk, if he doesn't agree, it's no go. And that's something that has been lost in Theravada Buddhist countries. Like in Burma, it's just unthinkable that some junior monk would just like derail a formal act of the Sangha if like the abbot, who was like king, was in favor of it. I mean, that would just be unthinkable. I mean, it's not even a taboo. It doesn't even get to the level of taboo. It just doesn't occur to anybody to even try it. So, yeah, I do not think that Buddhist rule, I mean, whatever that really means, would be considered what liberals might call an absolute monarchy. No, I don't think so. Because the Buddha really did set up the Sangha to be like a democracy that required consensus. Like everyone has to agree in order to change anything of significance. So, I don't know, it might be more towards communism, really, when you've got, I mean, it's very regimented. You know, everyone has all these rules they have to follow, bare minimum of personal property, that kind of thing. So it'd be kind of more towards the left, I think, in certain respects anyhow. But then again, absolute monarchy, where is that on the political spectrum? Seems like North Korea is an absolute monarchy, and that's pretty much of a kind of a Marxist state, quasi-Marxist state anyway. Soviet Union, like under Stalin, for example, pretty much of an absolute monarchy there. So, yeah, I really don't think that the Buddha would have endorsed monarchy. I mean, that was just sort of the rising fashion, the political tide in the Ganges Valley in the Buddhist time was these oligarchic republics were being replaced by expansionist monarchies. And eventually it was Magadha, the kingdom of Magadha, that just pretty much swallowed up everything else in northern India. And eventually became like the empire of Ashoka. So, yeah, I'm just going to move on to Siddhartha Lohachita's second question, which is as follows. Do you consider that the democratic and human rights global plan led by America and his puppets need to be stopped? And it may be that Siddhartha Lohachita speaks English as a second language, so that there's a certain kind of lack of grace in this question. Maybe some grammatical faux pas. So let me try and figure out what exactly he means here. Do you consider that the democratic, and I don't know, he's got democratic capitalized with a capital D, so does he mean the Democratic Party in the United States, or does he mean just, and people who endorse democracy in general? That's the first kind of ambiguity here. And the human rights global plan led by America and his puppets. So America and its puppets, I guess. But really, I mean, it seems like the EU has taken the ball and is running with it at this point. It's not so much America leading this global plan, human rights global plan. I mean, America has always, or at least recently, has endorsed human rights throughout the world. You know, they don't like slavery. British Empire didn't like slavery either. You know, they want a certain amount of human rights. Just, you can't just like arrest people in the middle of the night and throw them in prison without like even having charges against them, which a lot of countries, I mean, I lived in a military dictatorship for years that sort of thing happens, and America has sort of been a kind of global policeman trying to keep that to a minimum, even though probably to some degree it happens in America too. But at least they're trying to keep it to a minimum. So do I think that the whole New World Order, let's just simplify this whole question. It might kind of deviate from exactly what he was referring to, but let's just simplify it and make it less ambiguous. So do I think that the Western New World Order needs to be stopped? Well, whether it needs to be is kind of, I don't know. I mean, need is kind of a strange question too. Should it be stopped? In the form it is taking, yes. I mean, there might be something resembling a world government at some point, but there's all different kinds of world governments, just like there's all different kinds of national governments. So world government in and of itself is not necessarily a good thing. It can be a really bad thing. Like Huxley's Brave New World was a new government, or a global government. At least I'm pretty sure it was. But I mean, Huxley wrote that as a kind of dystopia and a warning that this could happen to us if we are not careful. So, yeah, the New World Order stuff, like certain aspects of it, especially like the neo-Marxism stuff, even the feminism stuff, that is not helping society. I mean, superficially, maybe, to some degree, but in the long term, it causes society to decline. It results in decadence and eventual collapse. Just even women voting. This is politically incorrect, but that's fine, I guess. I mean, women are more like emotionally insecure, more conformist than men. Also, women, because they're insecure, they're more timid than men. They're, as a general rule, I mean, there's always exceptions. Some women are taller than some men too. But women are much more inclined to be willing to vote away their rights and freedoms and everybody's rights and freedoms for the sake of security. Also, they are compassionate to the extent that they want to uplift the misfits who, in a more Darwinian society, would just fall by the wayside and keep the society strong because the weak are not reproducing nearly as much. And they're just putting them on welfare, and just inviting millions and millions of people to invade who do not share the values of the traditional culture, this sort of thing. So, yeah, I think we'd be better off with like an older style accumulation of nations with like a balance of power and like international tribunal, just voluntary international tribunals settling disputes rather than just, bloody war going on all the time. But it is good to have a diversity of cultures, which not like necessarily within one nation, but a diversity of political systems and cultures and societies, so that Darwin can continue to be God Emperor, and the strongest ones will rise up and the weakest ones will die out. But let's see, get back to the original question. Whether it needs to be stopped, I mean, needs means that it's necessary to be stopped. And then, I mean, if it's necessary to be stopped, then it will be stopped. I mean, if something needs to be stopped and it isn't, then what kind of situation do you have there? But I think, yeah, like the whole progressivism stuff, the New World Order stuff, yeah, it's going in the wrong direction. So, I mean, there could be a different New World Order, a different kind of world government that is much better that I might endorse. But the way it's going now is definitely, for the most part, leading the world in the wrong direction, leading Western civilization in the wrong direction anyway. So I'm just going to move on to Siddhartha Lohachita's third question, which is why Pali didn't become a lingua franca in Southeast Asia, and they even did not create neologisms like telephone, radio, plane, etc. Well, I mean, is Siddhartha Lohachita referring to neologisms in Pali? Or, in Burmese, the word for telephone in Burmese is telepone. The word for radio in Burmese is radio, or in the northwest of the country is ladio, because Asians have problems with the letter R and L for some reason. Airplane is layinbian, which is not, that's a neologism, I guess. Neologism. But why didn't Pali become a lingua franca in Southeast Asia? I think it's mainly because there just weren't enough people who were fluent in Pali. The only people who were fluent in Pali in Southeast Asia were Buddhist scholars, mostly monks. And that's not good enough for, for it to be the official language of government or that sort of thing, the official language of like international trade. I'm not even sure if there even was a lingua franca in Southeast Asia, maybe like Han Chinese or something, or Sanskrit. There was quite a lot of Sanskrit spoken in like official documents, some like official inscriptions and so forth. Sometimes were in Sanskrit. So I think Sanskrit maybe came a little closer, partly because there was a lot of Hinduism in Southeast Asia also. Like Angkor Wat, I think, was a Hinduistic, like a temple or city, holy city kind of a place. So why didn't Pali become a lingua franca in Southeast Asia? I think it was just that there weren't enough people who were fluent in Pali. It would mainly be just obscure religious scholars. And that just wasn't enough to act as a seed crystal. That would be my guess. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Samana. And Samana has a kind of interesting question here. In my suggested videos, presumably on YouTube, this really fat and bald guy with tattoo appeared. He says he is pro-Pali Greek and Russian translator. But when he says things in Russian, he makes some simple declination mistakes. And his Pali pronunciation is a little weird. His channel name was Theoria Apophasis. I watched a couple of his videos. I could agree with some of his ideas on Buddhism, but mainly he was a weird guy with big self-esteem, sort fake in some ways, I thought. You probably know this guy with 300,000 plus subs. Did you check or see his Pali translation works? Well, you're referring to Ken Wheeler. And I've mentioned Ken Wheeler a number of times. I've written about Ken Wheeler. I think he was like the angry photographer at first. That was like his first YouTube channel. And he declares himself to be the world's leading authority on the Pali language and early Buddhism. And it doesn't surprise me at all that when he speaks Russian, he has substandard Russian grammar when he speaks, because his Pali is just as bad, if not worse. Let's see. I'm not sure if he has real Pali translation works. I don't think that he's really, his attempts at Pali are even to the level of even attempted translations, other than maybe brief passages. But I did read this really badly written essay. His writing style is barbaric. And he wrote this essay accusing the death of the Buddha on Mahakassapa, his senior disciple at the time of the Buddha's death. So he was accusing Mahakassapa, who was like the Buddha's successor as leader of the Sangha, senior monk in the Sangha, of murdering the Buddha. And some of the translations he gives are just obviously bad, bogus translations. like the word for blacksmith, he's got as like son of Mara, the evil one, this kind of thing. When really it's just was like Kamara. I think I don't recall the term. I think it's something like Kamara means blacksmith. That's the person who fed the Buddha his last meal, and the first A in Mara in the word, was it Kamara? Yeah, I should have looked it up before I did this video. But I mean, it doesn't have the long A, whereas Mara, the evil one, does have a long A, and it's obvious. I mean, the origin of the Pali word for blacksmith goes back into Vedic Sanskrit. It's already there in Vedic Sanskrit, and so Ken Wheeler, I mean, he seems to be more of a Neoplatonist, although his Neoplatonism probably sucks too. But he likes this idea of like the what is it? The philosophy, not the eternal philosophy, the perennial philosophy, where you've got like this like world soul kind of a thing. So he believes in that, and then he's trying to like force fit that onto Buddhism, and he is just warping and distorting Pali texts and Buddhist philosophy to like get that in there. And I mean, his claims to be the world's leading authority on the Pali language are just laughable. And there's an entire website just pointing out some of the BS that Ken Wheeler teaches. And it's mostly with regard to what he teaches about science, like physics, because he claims to be like one of the world's leading authority on that too. And it's like why Ken is wrong, something like that. And this after I wrote about his like distortion of early Buddhism, then the person who runs that website contacted me and asked if he could include my essay on Buddhism, because he mainly has been emphasizing the scientific stuff. So I gave permission. It might still be on his website. I can't remember the name of the website. It's like why Ken is wrong, something like that. But yeah, I think Ken Wheeler is, I wouldn't hazard any kind of psychoanalysis on the guy. But I mean, he really wants to pass himself off as some sage. And like when he says something complicated or difficult, he'll say it really fast, partly as a way of giving the impression that he has just mastered this so much that he can just rattle it off really quickly. But also he says it quickly so that your ear can't follow and catch the mistakes. But really, I mean, if Buddhism is correct and Mahakassapa really was an enlightened being, then for Ken Wheeler to be accusing him of being a murderer, murdering the Buddha, then, I mean, he's just setting himself up for some really bad karma for slandering a fully enlightened being. But he has this idea that the Buddha taught there's an immortal soul, and then Mahakassapa came along and just fucked it all up after killing the Buddha so that he could change Buddhism to teach that there is no self. That's in a nutshell what the essay that Ken Wheeler wrote in his atrocious writing style is about. So what exactly is the question? Did you check or see his Pali translation works? Such as they are. Mainly it was his essay on how Mahakassapa murdered the Buddha, which you can find online. I did write a blog post about it, so you can look on my blog for that. Do a search on Ken Wheeler on my blog, and then probably the link to his essay would be embedded in my essay somewhere. So anyways, I don't want to be bad-mouthing Ken Wheeler. That's a dead horse that has already been flogged plenty. So I'm just going to move on to Salmanav's second question. What do you think his ideas on Buddhism? What do I think of his ideas on Buddhism? Well, I've already pretty much answered that. He mainly wants to turn Buddhism into a kind of Neoplatonism, I think, or just, endorsing that there is like an Atman, like the Upanishads teach. and that he just bashes away at the idea of no self in Buddhism, even though, I mean, it's just, it's there from the earliest texts. I mean, the closest I could come to any idea that there is a self in Buddhism is that in the Atthakavagga, which, as I say, is probably the largest fragment of really archaic Buddhism existing in this world, that it says that a monk should have no atta and no niratta, which is kind of a play on words. It's puns. Atta here means what is taken up, and niratta is what is, like, what's the word? Thrown away, gotten rid of. So nothing taken up, nothing set down. But obviously, atta and niratta can also be interpreted to mean self and no self. So for the sage, there's nothing taken up, nothing discarded. And also for the sage, there's no self and no not self, because the Atthakavagga teaches you should not firmly believe in any concept, because the truth cannot be contained in concepts. Concepts are just symbols in the mind. So, yeah, his ideas on Buddhism are about as bad as his ideas on, like, physics, or his ability to speak Russian correctly. That he claims to be the world's leading authority, but really he is not. So, moving on to Samana. Going on to Samana's third question. In general, what is your view on true follower of Buddha, or true meditator, true bhikkhu, or enlightened folks with big fat belly? And I do not fully understand this question. I really don't understand this question either. I mean, is he referring particularly to Ken Wheeler? But Ken Wheeler wouldn't be true bhikkhu anyway. But he does have a big fat belly, I suppose. I mean, I think since he starts off with in general, what is your view on, say, an enlightened being who is obese? That I'm trying to condense this down into a question that I can understand clearly, and maybe some of you can understand clearly also. So, I mean, is it possible to have an obese enlightened being? And, well, I mean, I've got that picture right there of Neem Karoli Baba, who was a rotund individual. He would qualify as obese, but I mean, whether he was fully enlightened or not is hard to say. I mean, that might not even mean anything in a samsaric context, but he was a spiritual Superman. He was definitely this extremely advanced spiritually, and had just mind-blowing psychic powers, just based on multiple testimonies. Like the book Miracle of Love, Stories About Neem Karoli Baba by Ram Dass, is just full of miracle stories, of just first-hand testimonies of like these amazing feats. I mean, not every story in the book is him performing some miracle, but plenty of them are. So I do think it's possible that an enlightened being can be obese. I think it's possible that an enlightened being can be very skinny also. That it's like Neem Karoli Baba living in India. It was like he would work out karma of his disciples through the use of food. Like there's one testimony in the book Miracle of Love saying that Neem Karoli Baba people would invite him to meals, and this person saw him eat like 10 full-sized meals in succession at different houses. That in a way he's helping the person by accepting their food and just kind of like transmuting that food into some sort of merit for the person. That Ram Dass had this story of offering some oranges to Neem Karoli Baba relatively early on in their relationship, and Neem Karoli Baba just started like just gorging on these oranges. And it was explained to Ram Dass later that, I mean, he's like helping you to work out your karma through eating the food that you give him. And Ram Dass pointed out that there was a different guru living in southern India who did similar things with cigarettes. He'd be smoking like 4 cigarettes at a time. Just people would donate cigarettes to him and he'd just be smoking through them as a way of somehow transmuting their karma, which isn't a Buddhist idea. It's more of a Hindu idea that you can really manipulate somebody else's karma that way. But Neem Karoli Baba apparently did it with food. And one of his main teachings is, feed people. It's like also he said that God comes to the hungry in the form of food. So it was sort of like a kind of food-oriented Dharma in his case. He was a relatively strict ascetic, like just amazingly strict ascetic in his youth. He became a sadhu as a child. He just ran away from home and became a sadhu just due to parami, just sort of karmic momentum from previous lives, apparently. So, yeah, although the fat Buddha statues that you see really were not the Buddha. That was a Chinese monk named Hote. So, yeah, I mean, once you become enlightened, what's going on at the physical level really becomes largely irrelevant. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Meditator's Library. And Meditator's Library says, what is your take on bhikkhus are teaching lay people on the internet, spending lots of time and effort? Well, it depends on the bhikkhus, I suppose. I mean, for some monks, it's part of their practice is teaching. It is a good practice to help others. What you have learned, you can share that with others. It's pretty much what I'm doing on my Q&As. So I think for some bhikkhus, it's helpful. For other bhikkhus, especially if they have this ambition of becoming like a famous teacher. A lot of Burmese monks are this way. It's like their ambition is to become a famous teacher Sayadaw. And some of these monks in Burma, they will cultivate a peculiar tone of voice. It's like their own unique gimmick style. And there's one famous Sayadaw in Burma that has been dead for several decades at this point, Chanigan Sayadaw. And I don't know if it's still that way in Burma, but it used to be wherever you would find Burmese people, you'd hear tapes of Chanigan Sayadaw chanting in this weird, like wailing, melodious, caterwauling voice. This easily identifiable. You hear it, that's Chanigan Sayadaw. And so there's some monks that just practice their own version of that. They just come up with some vocal gimmick, some peculiar characteristic style. Now, not just an ordinary speaking voice. And I mean, those kind of monks, because, their ambition is becoming famous teachers, or even just like influential teachers, that, it's not becoming enlightened for them. So they're probably causing more harm to themselves than good, or at least they're making good karma, but it's karma, like good and bad are for lay people. A monk is supposed to leave behind merit and demerit. He's supposed to leave behind good and evil. That this whole duality of good and evil is just this samsaric phenomenon. It's suitable for lay people who aren't ready to become enlightened yet. But if you are anywhere near to being ready for enlightenment, then, really, cultivating merit is almost as bad as cultivating demerit, because it just keeps you in samsara. You might go to heaven, but heaven is part of samsara. So it depends on the bhikkhu and their attitude. Especially, if they become very wise, then it is good for them to, it's good for Dharma, good for the sasana, for them to be sharing what they know. Like Ajahn Chah, for example, would be a golden example of that. So I'm just going to move on to Meditator's Library's second question. Does teaching benefit the teacher whole a lot for his own enlightenment or level up the enlightenment? I mean, can make his path towards enlightenment smoother, because, going with karmic retribution, the whole idea of that, if you're teaching people who need a teacher, then when you need a teacher, you're going to get one. So, in a way, it's sort of like preparing the path for enlightenment, but really enlightenment itself is not the result of merit. That nirvana has no cause. It's a paradox. So yeah, leveling up the enlightenment, no, it wouldn't do that. But it would make your path more fortuitous, especially with regard to getting teachings that you need as a result of you giving others teachings that they need. So I'm just going to move on to Meditator's Library's third question, which is as follows. If you have to criticize Nyanamoli's teachings, what part of his teachings or styles would that be? And this Nyanamoli is the second famous Nyanamoli, not the first famous Nyanamoli. The first famous Nyanamoli was an Englishman named Osbert Moore, who was ordained in Ceylon back around 1950 and died around 1960. And he's the one who was a really good translator. Like the classic go-to translation of the Visuddhimagga is by the first famous Nyanamoli. The second famous Nyanamoli is on YouTube, and I think he's a Serbian monk who has a monastery in, I think it's Slovenia. And you can watch his YouTube videos. And let's see, if I have to criticize his teachings, what part of his teachings or styles would that be? Well, he is rather dogmatic. He kind of reminds me of a Buddhist version of that Acharya Hindu person who insists that it's not Hinduism, it's Sanatana Dharma. He has this same authoritative, dogmatic approach to Dharma or Dhamma that I think is not the best approach to take necessarily. Also, he does seem to have some ego. I think he works out and is like buff, and he can be sort of rude and like interrupt people, and just because he's the leader, he's the authority, he does seem to have a kind of pride, sort of a self-aggrandizement going on. But then again, I mean, monks are human, and the only monk that doesn't have any faults might be a fully enlightened one, but even a fully enlightened being can still appear to have faults. So, I mean, I'm not trying to bash him or discourage people from listening to his talks, that sort of thing. Human beings are human by definition. So, I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Cherzaskaziz. And Cherzaskaziz says, how the fact that one pretty much has to be with his teacher or preceptor for 5 years after go free as a monk was resolved in your case when you went to Burma after 1 or 2 years in the US. Another obscure question about monastic discipline. Right up my alleyway. So the rule is that once a monk is ordained, he has to live in dependence upon his upajjhaya or preceptor for at least 5 rainy seasons, or until his preceptor judges that he is adept enough at being a monk that he can go solo. He knows he can recite the Patimokkha by heart. He knows how to meditate. He knows how to bake a bowl, make robes, that sort of thing. So at least 5 years. It could be longer than 5 years. Or if being in dependence upon your upajjhaya or preceptor isn't working out for whatever reason. Let's say the preceptor dies, or there's problems at the monastery and the monk needs to move somewhere else. And even his preceptor agrees it'd probably be better for you to live somewhere else, that kind of thing. And that happened in my case. Then you still have to take dependence or nisaya, but you can take your dependence on an acharya. So you have to be independent upon a preceptor or a teacher, an upajjhaya or an acharya. And acharya is the word that has been corrupted into the Thai language as ajahn. And it also has been corrupted into Burmese as the saya part of sayadaw. Acharya literally means like teacher. So if your preceptor, you're not independent, you have to be independent for at least 5 rainy seasons, 5 years. And so it has to be on your dependence on your preceptor or on some other senior monk in good standing who agrees to be your acharya or teacher. And that's what happened in my case, that after I left America and my preceptor in America went to Burma, and my acharya or teacher was Pakoku Sayadaw, Tampulu Chaltsin Sayadaw. And he was my preceptor for a little over a year. Then he sent me to a school monastery to get a good education, where my preceptor or my teacher there was Venerable Ain Dobatha. And then I came back to Chaltsin Doya, where Chaltsin Sayadaw was my teacher again, until I got enough seniority that I didn't have to live independence, and then I just became a free agent and just went off and lived alone in caves. So, Trezaskaz's second question is as follows. After 30 years of not cooking food, were you able at first, after you disrobed, to make food or cook for yourself? Well, cooking food isn't something you forget, really. You don't forget how to make a grilled cheese sandwich. It's just, you just know how to do it. Or like pan-fried oysters or fried liver and onions. Those were like things that I knew how to make. Or actually, the fried liver and onions, you just look up a recipe on the internet. I mean, anything like that now. You want to know how to cook something that you haven't cooked before, or you just don't remember how to cook it, then you just look on the internet. I used to have a cookbook. I would refer to the cookbook even to bake a potato. The joy of cooking. I had it in my kitchen. Even to bake a potato, I would refer to the joy of cooking on how to bake that potato. But I was never much into cooking. Like before I became a monk, I didn't cook very much. And usually, whatever I cooked used a minimum of dishes. I did not like washing dishes. I did not have an automatic dishwasher. Everything was hand washed at the sink. And I just worked out this system where I'd make mostly sandwiches. You use one knife, and then you can just wipe the knife off with a paper towel and put it back in the drawer. Easy. Or make oatmeal, and then you just eat it straight out of the pot with the same wooden spoon that you use to stir it. And then, oatmeal is pretty much water soluble. It washes out pretty easy. That kind of stuff. Grilled cheese sandwich, easy. So I didn't have any problem at all. I've always been kind of a bread eating kind of a person, like a sandwich person. So yeah, there was no problem at all, really. And then very shortly after I stopped being a monk, I had a woman who was a really good cook. In fact, she kind of learned from me how to pan fry oysters or make fried liver and onions, that kind of thing. And then she just kind of took it over. So even that stuff I don't make anymore. I do very little cooking now. So I guess I answered that question. Yeah, it was really no problem at all. Grilled cheese sandwiches are easy. And so the next question is from someone whose name is spelled Kriel, but it is pronounced throat warbler mangrove. And he asks, does taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha reduce bad karma from bad actions performed before and after the refuge? Thank ye. And it depends. Even if it does, it's going to be in a subtle way. The karma is going to still be there. It's just that if you're wiser, then you'll be able to deal with the fruition of that karma more wisely. And so if taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha implies that you have become a Buddhist and have started living your life in like a dharmic manner, you have started viewing your life and the world through a kind of spiritual lens, then sure. But just taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha as a mechanical act of just reciting blah, blah, blah in Pali, and that's not going to change anything. Burmese are spiritual materialists. They think that you earn merit for just taking the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts, even if you have no intention of keeping those 5 precepts, that you're earning merit just for the ceremony. But I don't think it really works that way. But if you sincerely are taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha to the point that you have started like living your life in dharmic terms, as I already just mentioned, then that is going to make your mind more subtle, and it's going to make your reactions to things that happen to you more subtle. And it may even cause sort of like the tone of what is happening to you be more subtle. And also, if you're started earning merit through your refuges, just through becoming a Buddhist or just through like entering upon a spiritual path, that you're earning more merit, then the bad karma from your past is going to be diluted down. It's going to be mixed in with more good. And that's the famous sutta, like the simile that I've mentioned a number of times, is the Buddha compares a person's bad karma to a handful of salt. So if you pour that handful of salt into a cup of water, it's so salty that the water is undrinkable. But you take that same handful of salt, pour it into a pool of clear water, and it gets dissolved in this whole pool, then you may hardly notice the taste of salt at all. And that pool of clear water is like merit. Just the water is sort of symbolizes merit. So if you can't get rid of your past karma other than by letting it run its course, but you can dilute it down by lots of merit. And if you take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha and take that to heart, then yeah, it's going to reduce the effects of bad karma from bad actions. But it's not just going to erase them. That you can't just do Hail Marys or whatever, make confession and just have some Taoist priest like wave a paper wand at you and make your sins go away. It doesn't work that way in Buddhism. It still has to run its course, but the wisdom you bring to it when it's like reaching fruition is, I mean, that's up to you, and it can result in more bad karma, or it can result in just the karma exhausting itself, and maybe you even get some good karma through your equanimity or whatever. And I finally finished the cold coffee. So I hope I answered that question satisfactorily, because I am moving on to the next one. This is from PSA. I'm going almost 2 hours here. So PSA says, do you think you would have been a better selection as Pope than the guy that was picked? Do I think that I would have been a better Pope than Leo the 14th? Is that his name? Well, first of all, I don't know that much about Leo the 14th, but I really doubt that I'd make a better Pope than him, because frankly, I'm just not a Catholic. I'm not even a Christian. So it seems like a necessary prerequisite for being a good Pope would be to be a good Christian. And I'm not the guy. And with regard to Leo the 14th, I think he's a more conservative than the Rainbow Pope, who has recently passed on to whatever he has passed on to. So, yeah, I don't have any complaints against the new Pope at present. I can't say that he's not a Christian. Although quite a few people thought that the previous Pope Francis was hardly even a Christian. He seemed to be more of a Marxist than anything else. But that's really not for me to say. So yeah, I don't think I'd make a better Pope than Leo the 14th. I might have some better policies than him, but I'm not a Catholic. So PSA's second question. What is the geographical location of Mount Sumeru on the Earth? Particularly, from which country would it be visible? I'm guessing only those with their third eye open can see it. Well, you have to bear in mind that the whole idea of Mount Meru being, the tallest mountain in the world, the center of the earth, was, the people who came up with it were living in northern India, and they believed that they were living on the southern continent. And so you just go north of the southern continent, you got the Himalaya mountains. So the geographical location of Mount Sumeru would be the Himalaya mountains, or just north of the Himalaya mountains, with maybe the Himalaya mountains considered to be like the foothills to the south of Mount Meru. The Greek equivalent of Mount Meru would be Mount Olympus. Pretty sure. That's the foot of that mountain is where the Titans were chained up. Same as Mount Meru, with the Asuras chained up down there, although some Asuras did apparently get loose. But then I do have a book on my bookcase, the Surya Siddhanta, which is a medieval astronomy text from India. And it was influenced by Ptolemaic geography through trade routes with the Roman Empire. So by the time the Surya Siddhanta had been written, the Indian astronomers had come to the conclusion that the earth is round and not flat. So what they did was they had this idea that the earth is a sphere, but that Mount Sumeru is like coming up through the North Pole, so that the earth is sort of like an orange stuck onto a cone, and then the tip of the cone is coming out to the top of the orange. But personally, I'm inclined to believe that the closest thing we've got to Mount Sumeru in the empirical world would be Mount Everest in the Himalaya mountains. And that is, the ancient Indians got their idea for these giant mountains from the Himalaya mountains that were just north of India. So, I guess I'm just going to move on to PSA's next question, which is boiling water considered breaking the first precept because you're pretty much killing everything that is in the water? And this leads to yet another obscure little discourse on monastic discipline. So we'll start with Vinaya, or the rules of monastic discipline. That a monk is not allowed to pour out water that has living beings in it, or that he thinks has living beings in it. But those living beings have to be visible. If there's like little mosquito wigglers in the water, or little crustaceans skittering around in the water, that kind of thing, you're not allowed to pour it out. You're not allowed to cook it. That you commit a pachidia offense, which is of medium severity, an offense of medium severity, by using that water or pouring out that water, because it has visible living things living in it. But in ancient India, when they made these rules and when they made the 5 precepts, they had no concept of microscopic life. And if you can't kill even microscopic life, you're going to be paralyzed. Every time you walk outside, you're squishing, at the very least, microscopic organisms. Even if you're careful to avoid the ants, you're still going to be squishing little like nematode worms or little mites, this kind of thing. Every time you brush your teeth, you're killing bacteria. Harmless, innocent little bacteria. So I would assume that the first precept for lay people would be similar to the rules for monks in this regard. And so if it's microscopic, it's okay to kill it. In fact, there's even a few macroscopic life forms that monks were allowed to kill, like mildew. Monks are allowed to wipe mildew off a wall. Monks are allowed to, like I mentioned in a previous Q&A, spread their bedding out in the sun to get rid of bed bugs and other vermin. And that generally kills bed bugs and other vermin. If the sun doesn't kill them, the ants do. So boiling water is not considered breaking the first precept for Buddhists, but for Jains, I think it might. Like a Jain monk wasn't allowed to cook water. because cold water was considered to contain life, and the Jains had very liberal views on what is life and what isn't. Like, they considered fire to be a primitive kind of life, which actually has some profundity to it, because fire is a more chaotic kind of process that is similar to life itself. I mean, it requires oxygen. It needs oxygen to breathe. It needs food, that kind of thing. It's just that it's the oxidation reaction is happening like without steps. Like in life, metabolism works with essentially the same kind of oxidation of carbon and other materials as fire, but it breaks it up into little chemical steps. And then sometimes a little bit of energy is given off by one of these steps that can then be captured by like an ADP molecule, which then becomes an ATP molecule, which then is like charged with energy, which can then like instill that energy into some other process going on. But I've meandered away from the question. But boiling water is not considered to break the first precept. Killing microscopic life using mouthwash, for example, is not breaking the first precept. It has to be visible life. It's kind of an arbitrary thing that, once something is, someone with bad eyesight may be able to kill more than someone with good eyesight. But basically what it boils down to is if you can see that there is a living thing there, you shouldn't kill it. But if you can't see it, no problemo. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Quaesitor. And Quaesitor says, if someone is taught that animals don't have souls, are not living beings, but are more like AI and are here for us to eat, would this person catching and eating fish create less karma than someone who believes that the animal they're eating was their mother in a past life, and by buying it, they've funded the raising and killing of other animals? Well, this reminds me, I asked essentially a similar question to my first Vinaya teacher when I was a junior monk, Venerable Utesaniya. And I asked him, it's like, some people think that killing is okay. Like in Christianity, killing animals is fine. There's no sin at all. Jesus, after he died, helped his apostles catch fish. I mean, Muslims and also the Old Testament says that under certain circumstances, it's okay even to kill humans, that God wants you to kill them. So anyway, I asked my teacher, Utesaniya, which is, do you get worse karma by doing something bad that you know is bad, or by doing something bad that you actually think is good? You think you're going to go to heaven for killing these people? Or you think that fishing is just good, clean fun? You're not hurting anything. And he gave me the interesting answer that it's sort of like handling something that's hot. If you know that something is really hot before you handle it, you're going to handle it more carefully and you won't burn yourself as badly. If you don't know that it's hot, you just grab a hold of it and you can burn your whole hand. So according to him, if you know that it's bad and you do it anyway, you're not making as much bad karma as if you think that it's good but it's really bad and you do it. And I have to admit, I mean, I think it might vary from case to case. That, I mean, if you're just torn up by guilt, let's say you go fishing, you think that fishing is murder, but you're just trying to conform with your friends who like to go fishing. So you go fishing, you catch a fish, and you're just like tormented by guilt after doing it. Then you might be making more bad karma than your buddy who caught the same number of fish as you. But for him, I mean, it's just fun. He likes fishing. He doesn't think there's anything bad at all. Maybe he's a Christian. Because he's not going to be adding to that bad karma through this guilt and remorse, this kind of stuff. Well, it's like Cartesian philosophers back in like the 1700s. They would publicly torture dogs just because Rene Descartes, the founder of their philosophical school claimed that only humans have a mind. Only humans are conscious because only humans have a soul. Animals are mindless automatons. How any wise person could actually believe this, especially if they've ever like owned a dog. I mean, maybe a Chihuahua, you can look into a Chihuahua's eyes and you don't get the distinct feeling there's someone looking back at you. But other dogs, I mean, you look in their eye, you know there's somebody there. You know, it's like some childlike, you know, simple-hearted kind of person in there. So, I mean, Islamists who think they're going to go to heaven for blowing up buildings, this kind of thing, full of people, unarmed civilians. Well, so it's complicated. But personally, let's just get back to the exact question here. Would this person catching and eating fish create less karma than someone who believes that the animal they're eating was their mother in a past life? I mean, why would you kill a fish if you thought it was your mama? And buying it, they funded the raising and killing of other animals. I think the actual act, like, just forget about the fish being your mama. Just assume that one person thinks killing is wrong, killing fish is wrong. The other person thinks killing fish is just a good, clean, fun hobby. Then it may be that just the act of killing the fish, that the person who thinks that it's wrong, depending on their attitude, they might make less bad karma because, sort of like Venerable Utesaniya was saying, they're more careful. You know, they're sort of being mindful of their actions, that kind of thing, while they're doing it. And they're not doing it like just wholeheartedly, oh, this is fun, this kind of stuff. But then if they're feeling guilt afterwards, they're just being, you know, tormented by guilt, even at a subconscious level. It's just kind of going on in the back of their mind. They might have dreams about it, that kind of thing. Then that sort of thing can add up, and they might be making more bad karma than the person who thinks that killing fish is just fine and dandy and that Jesus did it himself, or at least helped others to do it. But I do think it would vary from person to person. So I'm just going to move on to Quaesitor's next question, which is, it seems that events in our lives unfold to serve our deepest desires, which would indicate that our sense of self seems to be steering our direction in life. If separation is an illusion and we are ultimately the universe, would an Arahant, having cut the illusion of separation, be able to steer other people's lives for the purpose of general enlightenment or liberation? Well, it would depend on the karma of the individual person. Like an enlightened being can't just like manipulate you like a puppet, can't just take you over and manipulate you like a puppet. I mean, it wouldn't even be you anymore, really, if that happened. But, I mean, there's cases like Neem Karoli Baba up there, where he would like do stuff. Sometimes it would start off by him just completely blowing somebody's mind, just kind of destroying their idea of how the universe works by performing some miracle. And there's one story. He was some doctor. His wife was Indian, and she was a follower of Neem Karoli Baba. She was a devotee. And I mean, he thought, well, I'll go along with this. You know, she's my wife. She's a follower of this man. I'll go check him out. So he goes there, and, you know, he's already heard about the miracles and everything, but he just sees this fat old man sitting on this platform. And Neem Karoli Baba just ignores him day after day, just kind of ignores him. He just sees this fat old man. So he finally thinks, well, my wife is in a cult. This just isn't going to work. Maybe our marriage isn't going to work. I should just go back to America. And so he just sort of says he's not feeling well and doesn't go to the ashram that day. Instead, he just goes and like walks around this lake nearby. This is like in northwestern India. Krishna's old stomping grounds. And he's walking around the lake, and he's just sort of torn. The thought that his wife is just following this, maybe a charlatan, and their marriage is going to fail, and he just doesn't know what to do. He's in despair. He loves his wife, but it just looks like it's not going to work. And so he does something that he hadn't done since he was a child. He actually prays. He's praying to God. So then finally, the next day, the computer screen turned off again. Let's see here. It does this on purpose just to spite me. Telling you. Okay, just let it stay off. Anyways, there it went. So he prays to God. Then the next day, he's just going to go in and just say goodbye to Maharaji. And one of the things, before we get to this part, is one of the things that bugged him the most was seeing the disciples going and touching Maharaji's feet. That just seemed like degrading. It just bugged him. He was an American. He just didn't like that. So anyways, he goes there early the next day just to kind of have it out with Maharaji and just say goodbye, and he's going to leave. And people had put fruit on his platform, and an apple had fallen off the platform. So this doctor, he's going to pick up the apple and just put it back on the platform where it belongs. He reaches down to pick up the apple, and as soon as he does that, Maharaji comes out of the room, puts his foot on his hand, so that he's in this position on his knees, touching Maharaji's foot, that he just didn't like at all. So then they're just kind of two of them together. And through it, I guess there's a translator too, an interpreter. And Maharaji says, "Why weren't you here yesterday? Did you go to the lake?" And it's mostly in Hindi, but he says lake in English. And it was the doctor who he hadn't really been talking about this to his wife. There was no chance for her to communicate it to Maharaji yet anyhow. He just gets like this weird feeling like in his chest. And then Maharaji is just kind of playing with him. And he's like, "What did you do at the lake? Did you go swimming?" And then the doctor says, "No." And then Maharaji says, "Did you go boating?" And the doctor says, "No." And then Maharaji says, "Did you go horseback riding?" And the doctor says, "No." And then Maharaji kind of leans forward, looks at him very intently and says, "Did you talk to God?" And it was like, at this point, there's no way Maharaji could have known that through normal means. That it's just, he has like this tearing sensation, and he just starts crying like a child. And then the Maharaji is kind of reaching out and sort of stroking the doctor's beard, because this is back in like the late 60s. And Maharaji says, "Did you ask for something?" And what the doctor had asked for when he's praying to God is, "Show me a sign. Show me a sign that it's all going to work out." And he kind of looked around for a rainbow or something when he was at the lake, didn't see anything. So then he went home. He didn't tell anybody about this. And then Maharaji just keeps repeating over and over again, "Did you ask for something?" And he's just crying and crying. And then by this time, a lot of the other disciples had already shown up, and they're just sort of like caressing him, because most of them had gone through a similar experience with Maharaji. So, Maharaji could kind of steer people that way by giving them what they needed. First by blowing their mind, by doing something impossible, and then just sort of steering them sort of gently, in a direction more directed towards Dhamma, helping them to wake up, helping them to become wiser and better people. But he wouldn't just take over somebody that way. So let's see, did I answer the question yet? Let's see. Separation is an illusion. We are ultimately the universe. Would an Arahant, having cut the illusion of separation, be able to steer other people's lives? Yeah, only if their own karma allowed that. Sort of like we were talking about earlier, the karma of teaching. Do you get merit from teaching? It's like, if you need someone who needs a teacher, you come and you teach them what they need, then you've earned a kind of karmic merit. You can call it that, so that at some future time, you need a teacher, you're going to get what you need. And I think a lot of the people that watch these videos have had something like that happen. You just hear the thing you need to hear. You know, you get sent a link to some YouTube channel of some teacher, or just the book that you most need to read just lands in your hand. You know, someone just gives you this book, here, try this. Or someone advises you should try doing a Goenka retreat, something like that. And it's just this life-changing experience, just, you know, this casual thing. It could be the person isn't even deliberately trying to teach you anything. But that's the way it works. It's not like, I mean, even the Buddha himself did not successfully teach everybody. There were people who just thought he was a fool, people who thought he was a fraud, people who they knew that he was wise and everything, but still they just weren't ripe yet. You know, like the notorious group of 6 monks who were just doing all kinds of naughtiness. So, yeah, an enlightened being, he can maybe help people if they are open to that, but he can't just force them to, against their will, so to speak, to become wiser, better people. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from David. And David says, what type of meditation technique was the Buddha using when he became enlightened, and what types had he tried before he had his breakthrough? Well, it's hard to answer this question because as far as I can remember, the Pali texts really don't say. Like, what kind of meditation was he doing when he was sitting under the Bodhi tree? It's an obvious question, but this is maybe the first time I've ever heard anyone ask it. I don't think it even says in the texts exactly what his meditation object was. I think traditionally it would be most likely that he was doing anapana, or meditation on the breath. That would be like possibly the most likely traditional answer, although it may be that if he became fully enlightened, that he may have moved on to a more advanced, just sort of like a wide open, like fourth jhana kind of meditation that had no real object, no primary object of meditation. He was just sitting in a state of like emptiness and bliss. But who knows? Because I don't think the texts even say, and even if the text did say, there's no guarantee that they would be anywhere near to being correct. Because in the Pali text, and in Christianity, other religions also, if there are blank places, you know, like with regard to anything, they'll get filled in by myths and legends. So let's see here. What type of meditation technique was the Buddha using when he became enlightened? I don't know. It doesn't say. Although, as I say, it could have been like a very advanced, like fourth jhana kind of a meditation where there really is no method anymore. You're just kind of sitting there in a state of emptiness and bliss. But then there would have to be something that would result in liberating insight to arise. So I'm not exactly sure how it worked, and I don't think even his chief disciples, maybe the monks in the Buddhist time may have known, but we don't. At least I don't. And what types of meditation had he tried before his breakthrough? Well, he taught lots of different kinds of meditation. And so it may be, there's a good chance that he had experience in most of these meditation techniques that he was teaching. But again, there's no list of all the types of meditation the Buddha tried when he was a bodhisattva and hadn't become fully enlightened yet. And then after he became enlightened, he could just improvise. He could just come up with a new meditation technique just to fit an individual case, at least according to the text. You know, there was like this one monk whose preceptor was Venerable Sariputta, and Venerable Sariputta kept giving him different meditation, like primary objects to try, and he just wasn't making progress. The student wasn't making progress. So then finally he went to the Buddha, and the Buddha I think he gave him a red flower, said, meditate on this. And it worked just because the Buddha could like see into him and see just what it was that would kind of trigger, this liberating insight that was necessary. That, he could look inside the psyche of a student and see what kind of meditation technique would work the best. Even if he had to invent some new one, like the dullard, it's in the commentarial tradition. The dullard, it was this monk that was too stupid really to practice any kind of meditation very effectively. So the Buddha just gave him a piece of cloth and says, rub this. And I can't remember what he was supposed to recite. It was sort of like a mantra that he was going to be repeating when he's rubbing the cloth. And in his case, it worked, and he became an Arahant with psychic powers as a result of rubbing this cloth. But this question, it's a good question. It's just that I don't think the answers to this question or these two questions have been recorded. And even if some answer to them had been recorded, the odds are pretty good that they would just be guesses that got turned into myths or legends. So I'm just going to move on to David's second question, which is, what do you believe happens when the thousand-petalled lotus opens in the head? Well, it's my understanding that the thousand-petalled lotus opens just above the head. Isn't that the way it works? Isn't the seventh chakra, the highest chakra, like right here, like the sixth chakra is like the third eye, and then the seventh chakra is the thousand-petalled lotus, which when that opens, then you become fully enlightened. And the whole chakra system is more a yoga thing than a Buddhism thing. It's certainly never mentioned at all that I can recall in the Pali texts. So in a way, it's sort of combining two different systems. But what happens? I mean, how can you say what happens at the moment of enlightenment? You can say that, there's greed, hate, and delusion are transcended. But, I mean, at an empirical level, there may not be any obvious change at all. So, this is just kind of a trick question. The thousand-petalled lotus opens in the head or at the crown of the head, I suppose. You just transcend samsara. You might, empirically, objectively, you're still here. It's just that you're no longer identified with this. It's like that it's not ultimately real. Maybe putting it in sort of Christian terms, you become fully aware of the presence of God at all times. That kind of thing. But, there's no explanation of it that's going to help anyone who isn't there yet. It's like trying to explain colors to a person born blind, trying to describe the flavor of vanilla to someone who has never tasted vanilla before. You can just explain and explain and explain till you're blue in the face, and it's just not going to work. So, yeah. If you really want to know what happens when you become enlightened, you're going to have to become enlightened yourself. And that's, even the Buddha could not explain what being enlightened was like. Exactly what happens. It's like someone who's never tasted vanilla wants to know what vanilla tastes like. The best advice you could give them is go find some vanilla and taste it. Because no amount of explaining is going to get the idea across. Because it's not even an idea. It's a direct experience. It cannot be conveyed in words. So I guess I'm just going to move on to David's third question, which is as follows. People talk about the last Buddha and the future Buddha, and this implies that nobody has reached Buddhahood between these two people. If this is not the case, then why make the distinction? Thank you for your answers, and may it be a blessing to anyone who hears it. Well, in Buddhism, especially in Theravada Buddhism, there is a distinction between a Buddha and a mere Arahant. That a Buddha, like a Sammasambuddha, is a person who becomes enlightened without the aid of a teacher, without Dhamma already existing. He has to rediscover Buddhism or rediscover Dharma or Dhamma. So I mean, he has to do it through his own spiritual genius. And then he can teach others. And then his enlightened disciples aren't technically Buddhas, they're Arahants. And so a Buddha arises to get the wheel of Dhamma rolling again after Dharma has become extinct in this world. So it's sort of like saber-toothed tigers, where they become extinct and then they re-evolve, and then they become extinct and then they re-evolve and then they become extinct. It happens several times, or so I've read. And that's kind of the way Dhamma is, where you've got a Buddha rediscovers Dharma, gets the wheel of Dharma or Dhamma rolling again, starts a Buddhasasana, gets Buddhism going, and then Buddhism, because everything is impermanent, runs its course, eventually dies out. And then you have to have another person who rediscovers it, like thousands of years later, and then starts it going again, then it dies out, and then thousands of years later, another Buddha comes along who rediscovers it. So our Buddha was Gautama Buddha. The Buddha before him, according to tradition, was Kassapa Buddha. The next Buddha is going to be Maitreya Buddha. But there have been enlightened beings in between. In fact, there can be enlightened beings even at times when there is no Buddhism. They're called Pacceka Buddhas, who, even though they become enlightened without the aid of a teacher and are fully enlightened, nevertheless, they're hermits, they don't teach Dhamma, and they don't get the wheel of Dhamma rolling again. So they're just sort of flashes in the pan, so to speak. They become enlightened, but they don't really get Dharma, like, they don't really get it going again. So I hope I answered that question coherently enough. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the last question. That's kind of nice. 2.5 hours. It's a long question, though. So this is from Mogambo. And Mogambo asked a question last week saying that he doesn't believe in karma. I mean, that was part of his commentary to the question was he doesn't believe in karma. So I pointed out that if karma is volition, then if you don't believe in karma, you don't believe in volition either. And then I pointed out that some superficial levels of karma should be obvious even to a materialist. For example, just the fact that karma is the momentum of your mind. It's like the habit energy of your mind. And it's like the automatic pilot that just has you sleepwalking through life just through force of habit without having to be fully awake. So this is like his response to my first answer, which is kind of a refinement of his previous question, I think. Mogambo says, the query I asked last week about memory and karma was not properly elaborated by me. What I meant to say was I don't believe in past or future karma because I think as humans, our conditions arise due to genes passed down from our parents, geography, intellect, education, societal structure, or hierarchies of a given society. For example, someone can be born with deformed body parts due to natural reasons while it was growing inside the womb. Someone could meet with an accident due to fault of others or their own. Someone could be depressed because they are ugly or have no money due to being born in poor family. Or someone could have good looks, money, healthy life, brilliant mind due to opposite conditions. These conditions arise due to pre-existing factors which are out of our control and random. We don't need past life momentum for our conditions now. Karma, according to me, are the conditions we are born with, and Dharma is how we deal with pleasant or unpleasant experiences we go through life. Past and future lives seems like wishful thinking or cultural belief in that time, just like Abrahamic faiths have afterlife and heaven and hell. What are your thoughts on karma and dharma being a process we go through in a single lifetime, not multiple lifetimes? Well, for starters, it seems that he prefers a kind of like scientific realism. And scientific realism is another case of, let's see, cultural belief in that time. That, I mean, it's like there are so many people, maybe they're scientific materialists. I don't think Mogambo necessarily would have to be a scientific materialist, but there are scientific materialists who think other people believe in superstitions, they believe in stuff based on faith, but now we know the truth. And it's just about every single culture, every single society that has ever existed has this same attitude. It's like other societies, even our own society in the distant past, believed in superstitions, they believed in myths, but now we know the truth. Scientific materialists are just the same. I mean, they have maybe a more sophisticated approach because it's backed up by some objectivity, some inferential logic, empiricism, but still, it's not really describing reality. So, but at least I was able to get the point across that karma does exist. Even if you just accept it at a superficial level, people who are like scientific realists, that's all they can understand is at the superficial level anyway. But, I mean, at the superficial level, it's like your karma is like the momentum of your mental states, your habit, the habit energy of your mind. So if you don't want to exist, you don't want to believe in past lives or future lives, I mean, all that really matters is the present moment anyway. So, I mean, you read the Atakawaga, it says you shouldn't have beliefs anyhow. So, I mean, you don't want to believe in past lives. You don't want to believe in future lives. That's your option. But, I mean, you should be similarly skeptical that, let's see, what is it? Let's see. That the cultural belief of your time also is not describing reality. You should be skeptical even of like scientific empiricism. Talking about genes, for example. So I'm not like I'm like opposed to science. But science really has no position to make metaphysical claims about the nature of reality. And even like theoretical physics has gotten to the point, and it has gotten to that point like about 100 years ago, that it's our own mind is helping to determine like the reality that we are in. So if you get to the point where your own mind is creating your own reality and you can conveniently ignore like parapsychology, the paranormal, you just call it all bullshit or wishful thinking or whatever, then you can do that too, I suppose. But I'm not going to try and force you to believe in past lives and future lives. Ultimately, it really doesn't matter all that much. I mean, if you accept the first noble truth of Buddhism and you don't believe in rebirth, then the obvious thing to do would be to delete yourself in Minecraft. But I'm not recommending that either. But the only moment, I mean, the most important moment is the present moment. According to Theravada Buddhism, the only moment that really exists is now. So, I mean, just live a dharmic life now. And you don't even have to worry. Don't even think about past lives or future lives. It doesn't even matter really. And it may be that your worldview, the samsaric worldview, the interpretation of samsara will change over time. Let's see. Have I answered this question adequately? That is the question. That is my question. Let's see. Where's the question mark? Let's see. What are your thoughts on karma and dharma being a process we go through in a single lifetime not multiple lifetimes. Well, I mean, you want to get rid of past lives and future lives, you might as well just get rid of past and future also. It's just happening now. I mean, that's really all, that is really what matters is now. So, I mean, I really do not believe in karma as Mogambo interprets it, which is just, it's like physical and physiological conditions that one lives in, cultural conditions, that kind of thing. I mean, it's your karma will help to determine that. Man, your karma pretty much determines what kind of life you're going to be born into, what kind of culture you're going to be born into, what kind of belief systems you're going to be born into. But I'm certainly not a materialist. I think mind is chief. It is all mind made, like the first verse of the Dhammapada says. Let's see. Is there anything else that I should say? Let's see, what are your thoughts on karma, dharma being a process we go through in a single lifetime? Well, ultimately, it's an illusion anyway. And I think even science would have to agree with that at this point. Something like biology, which has to assume the existence of a pluralistic samsara, then yeah, they're not going to be transcending physical entities and so forth. But when you get into the more abstract realms of physics, then it all starts breaking down and becomes like a kind of mental formation, a projection of consciousness. And once you get to that, then it's like off to the races. So I guess I'm done. I guess I answered questions. That's what I guess. And so, as I should always say at the beginning, I never do. If you have any questions you think I can answer, which doesn't include futurism in right-wing politics, I don't know anything about that. But if you think I can answer early Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, Buddhism in general, you've heard it all before. Stuff that you think I can answer questions about. Biology too. I do have a degree in biology. Marine emphasis. Then feel free to ask no more than 3 questions per person per episode, please. And count the question marks. Some people will ask one question that has 4 question marks in it, which makes it 4 questions. And aside from that, I would just add, furthermore as well, be happy.